For decades, North Wales was the hunting ground for a mysterious, sadistic attacker.
Men were getting attacked by a tall man who wore black leather clothing.
And in the 1990s, the man in black graduated to serial killing.
Killed without any mercy at all.
Stabbed 9 times?
Hiding behind a respectable facade, the killer led a sordid double life.
I cannot believe that this turned into a house of horrors.
There was whips, there was rubber truncheons.
Blood splatters on the walls and on the ceilings.
But what made this monster? Was he born to kill? In the mid-1990s, the popular stretch of coast from Kinmel Bay to Pensarn in North Wales attracted thousands of holidaymakers looking for their annual dose of relaxation in the summer sun.
When the holiday season started, you get the people coming from Manchester, Stoke, Liverpool. So a right mixed bag of people come and spend their holidays in the caravans.
It's very much a tourism area. There's no major industry in the area. To put it quite simply, it closes down in winter.
When the caravan sites close down, the area becomes more of a village community and gets more of a village feel to it. It's reasonably crime-free.
You could get the burglaries, you get the drunk drivers, but it was just the ticking over crime.
On December the 17th, 1995, 35-year-old father of 2, Anthony Davis, had been looking forward to Christmas, but had put his festive preparations on hold to help out an aunt in need.
She wanted to go up to the graveside, you know, to see where her husband was buried, take some flowers up there. And unfortunately, on the way out of the cemetery, she's fallen and she broke a leg.
Anthony and his wife Sheila would stay with their aunt at the local hospital all day. It was a typical act of kindness from the warm-hearted family man.
You'd like him straight away. He's the type of guy that you can sort of get to know within seconds. You wouldn't get a word in edgeways with him half the time.
He was really funny. He was absolutely full of life and he was always playing with us. He was absolutely brilliant. He was like an older brother. That's how close we all were, really.
Having taken his aunt back home that afternoon, Anthony wanted to check up on her once more.
And that night, he said he was going back to see her, just to pay her a late call. And it was when he didn't return home from seeing her that the family became concerned.
I got a phone call, I think it was about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was Sheila, and she said, "Is Anthony there, Malcolm?" And I said, "Good God, no." She said, "He hasn't come home." I said, "Right, I'll go and have a look." And I went out in my car to look for him.
As their concerns increased, Malcolm would be joined by Anthony's brother, Gary, as they scoured the local area. But with still no sign of the 35-year-old, the family reported the matter to the police. PC Phil Greaves was just starting out on his early shift.
Night shift just mentioned to me that there was a person missing. They mentioned the vehicle he was missing in. And I just took it as an adult missing, could go anywhere.
Anthony's car was eventually found at nearby Pensarn Beach. Former Detective Constable Dave Morris recalls the scene in the deserted car park.
During the early hours of the morning, local police officers came across Tony's vehicle, which was parked in this sort of vicinity here, across the road from the amusement arcade. And Tony wasn't in the car, there's no sign of him.
I had a quick look round. I couldn't see him sleeping in doorways or anything like that, so I just jumped onto the seawall.
The tide was out, but was coming in at that point in time. And as I walked onto the beach, I had a general search of the beach area, and I noticed a shape further down the beach.
You could see it was a person, head towards the sea, feet up the beach, quite close to the water's edge.
But the policeman's initial assessment was interrupted.
I heard a vehicle stop and looked up, and a guy jumped over the wall rather quickly, comes running down the beach towards me.
It was Gary Davis, the man who had spent the last few hours frantically searching for his missing brother, Anthony.
He went down to have a look, and they were dragging him out of the sea. And Gary said, "Shine a light on him." And they shined a light. And he said, "That's my brother," he said.
It was apparent that Anthony Davis had not died of natural causes.
So we moved the body up the beach, and only while moving the body up the beach that his jumper came up and saw the horrific wounds and realised, you know, he'd been stabbed umpteen times.
There were signs that Tony had put up a fight. There was a lot of debris moved about on the beach. There was evidence in this area here of a struggle. There was blood on the stones, on the rocks, and eventually Tony Davis was stabbed to death and he collapsed and died on the beach here.
News of the brutal murder soon reached the victim's close-knit family.
That day, I'll never forget it. It was horrible. We just couldn't digest it. It just wasn't right. We couldn't believe somebody's murdered him. He didn't have an enemy.
You'll never forget that pain that we suffered at that time. No, I'll never forget the way my family were different. Everything changed in the click of the fingers. It just changed. Our life just fell apart.
As investigators searched for clues to Anthony's murder, they were aware that Pensarn Beach had been the scene of unprovoked violence before. Rumoured to be a gay meeting point, several men had suffered attacks by a mystery assailant over the preceding years.
It was described, rightly or wrongly at the time, as a notorious stretch of the beach.
We were aware that there'd been some men attacked on Pensarn Beach, historically, by a tall man who wore black leather clothing and quite violently assaulted and robbed people.
But as the community reeled, one local man appeared firmly focused on business.
I remember his first film, it was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and that was a really good film, and everybody was so excited because it hadn't been out for long.
The Christmas holiday was traditionally a busy time of year for local cinema owner Peter Moore.
At one stage he mentioned that he'd had, I think it was 1,200 people through the doors in 1 week.
Championed as a saviour of the big screen, Moore had opened his first local cinema 5 years previously.
He began by taking over the old cinema at Baggilt. He bought some old theatre seats from Inrail, I believe, and put those in. Understandably, the communities were only too pleased that their cinemas were opening in their areas.
I thought he was great, and a lot of other people, the residents in the village, should think he was great. He was a very laid-back person, had a good manner about him, very polite. He was an ideal person to be running the cinema.
Film enthusiast Peter Moore had been born 49 years previously in 1946.
The Moore family moved to Kinmel Bay from St Helens when Peter Moore was a very young child.
Catherine Hughes lived next door to the Moores and their imposing custom-built home, Darlington House.
Kinmel Bay was very rural. It only consisted of a post office, a chip shop, a newsagent's and a confectioner's. Darlington House was the most prominent building, but everywhere else was fields.
They were definitely well respected in the area, and they would have been one of the more affluent people in Kinmel Bay at that point in time.
There was no other building around that was like this. and the status that it gave to the Moore family. It was almost like they were the lord and lady of the manor, and Peter was their, you know, up-and-coming prince, if you like.
Peter Moore's parents made their money running a successful hardware shop on the ground floor of the property.
I think it was more basically an ironmonger's from memory. Apart from groceries, I suppose he sold everything. And when you went in, it was pretty cluttered, like kettles and things hanging off hooks.
As a boy, Peter had been doted on by his mother.
Mrs. Moore loved Peter unconditionally. I don't think she believed that Peter could do anything wrong. I think her love for him was more than her love for Mr. Moore. He loved her to pieces as well.
Peter Moore had always stood out from his peers.
I think it was obvious to others that Peter was gay from when he was a young teenager. Certainly he was different from the other boys. The other boys knew he was different, and I think they treated him accordingly.
Although close to his mother, Peter's relationship with his father appeared very different.
I never saw any affection between Peter and his dad, or Mr. Moore and Mrs. Moore. They were like two separate units.
While the young Peter and his mother spent most of their time together, Ernie, Peter's father, was dedicated to running the successful business.
He was quite large in stature. You could tell that Mr. Moore had been a military man by the way he held himself, and he almost marched. But he liked to drink. He would have a whiskey tipple probably on and off throughout the day. My dad told me not to spend any time alone with him, so I didn't. Don't know why, but that's what I was told to do.
I do remember Mr. Moore, Mrs. Peter's father, coming in, and he was absolutely plastered from alcohol one day, and this was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Peter did mention at some stage that he had been violent towards him.
I think Mr. Moore knew that Peter was gay, and I don't think he liked it. I do think Mr. Moore was probably quite homophobic towards Peter. He didn't tolerate his mannerisms, he didn't tolerate his personality, and he would tell Peter off.
When they're humiliated young, they want to be sure this never happens again. And they will resent the source of that humiliation deeply, whether it's their father, their mother, a teacher, whoever it is, that person is going to become symbolic to them. And when they get to the point where they have enough power to react against some symbol of that source, they will.
Those that knew the industrious cinema owner could never have imagined the dark way his life would play out. During December 1995, the body of 35-year-old Anthony Davis had been found brutally stabbed on Pensarn Beach in North Wales. It began to emerge that a series of attacks had been occurring in the region for decades at the hands of a violent, sadistic man.
I had been aware of various assaults having been reported over the years.
Men were getting attacked during the late hours of the evening.
Apparently he was jumping out, following people, and he'd batter them.
They were pretty violent attacks. They were generally attacked from behind with what we believe was a rubber cosh.
One or two I know of the victims were lucky to survive.
I interviewed one who was so badly hurt that he lived the rest of his life in a nursing home.
This person who was attacked said, I was convinced he was going to kill me. He was definitely going to kill me.
People who've been attacked, they had an idea that of his description, this big bloke and so on, and dressed in black.
Despite police efforts, the mystery assailant had remained at large for more than 20 years. But in 1995, the sadistic violence would reach a whole new level. On the 22nd of September, retired railway worker Henry Roberts had spent the majority of the day at home. It was a routine he had followed since the death of his mother 9 years previously.
He lived in a pretty ramshackle place in Cargailog, a village just a few miles from Holyhead. Locally it was hinted that he could be gay, but he was a man who was respected.
Henry was a bachelor, a guy who lived Anglesey all his life. The people that knew Henry regarded him as a recluse, a loner, quite eccentric.
Henry also had a controversial hobby.
It was known that he had this interest in Nazi memorabilia.
As a creature of habit, Henry would leave his ramshackle cottage and take a daily stroll to the local pub.
Henry lived in this location here, but he would walk every day to Cargailog, which is just down the road here, about a quarter mile away, to the pub. And that was his lifestyle. He'd go to the pub every day and walk home back to his cottage.
I think someone said he once spent up to £100 a night on buying drinks, and local people knew that he had a fair amount of cash.
So regular were his visits. When Henry didn't show up at the pub for 3 days in a row, locals became worried.
He hadn't been seen in the pub for a couple of days, so they were concerned for his welfare. Some guys from the pub came here, they came through the gates, walked into the yard, and that's when they found Henry's body. He'd been lying there for some time.
As police arrived on the scene, they were shocked to discover that the 56-year-old had been the victim of murder.
It was a horrific attack, a brutal attack.
Henry Roberts had been stabbed dozens of times.
His trousers had been pulled down. His bare buttocks were on display. And it was quite apparent that he'd been stabbed to the buttocks on a number of occasions.
A post-mortem would reveal that the killer had delayed the fatal blow to prolong the victim's ordeal.
When you stab someone and they don't die, they're in pain. They're suffering, and this is arousing for an individual who's sadistic. He disabled the person, made him suffer, and then after an extended period of time, finally killed the person, just to prolong the sexual stimulation of the entire act.
Investigators had little to go on, but one sighting offered a potential lead.
A van had been seen in the driveway. Not on the night of the murder, but some days before the murder. So there was a lot of concentration on trying to identify the van and the driver of the van.
Local businessman and cinema owner Peter Moore would often crisscross the region by van. 16 years previously, his father, Ernie Moore, had passed away, leaving his 33-year-old son to run the family hardware store with the support of his doting mother.
When his father died and he took over the business, then the business changed really dramatically. They didn't sell as many tools or gardening equipment. It became more like a general store, and he brought in video hire.
was a busy shop, although I don't think he was making a lot of money. He had a lot of customers coming and going throughout the day. The large supermarket chain had opened about half a mile away from the shop, and I think it had a bit of an adverse effect on his business. So Peter sort of diversed a little bit.
He also ventured into using the upstairs hall and converted it into a disco, and it was called the Black Cat Disco. There was a lot of upset with the local community because they didn't want bright lights late at night and loud music because it wasn't soundproofed.
Peter Moore was also prepared to travel the local area, selling gas to boost his profit margins.
The caravan people could phone him up at 10 o'clock at night and say, Peter, look, I'm run out of gas, and he'd just jump in his van and deliver the gas bottle down there, and then they thought he was a wonderful man.
But it was not all plain sailing for the seemingly amenable shopkeeper. Local policeman Dave Morris would make frequent visits to the Moores' business at Darlington House.
We'd always be called here by Peter. There'd be an incident going on. Generally it was like a shoplifting offence, damage to his property.
But on entering the shop, the policeman would pick up on a distinct atmosphere.
One of the things I noticed when I used to visit the shop was that the staff were always very reluctant to speak to us. It was quite apparent that Peter was a gay man. The staff that would work for him were normally people he was in a relationship with. I formed the opinion, even then, that Peter was quite a sort of a dominant character.
Fellow shop owner Mike Owen recalls a character who also revelled in the limelight on the shop floor.
A good shopkeeper is an exhibitionist. They have a centre of attraction. They're trying to sell you something. And Peter Moore, I think, was pretty good at that. And I think he enjoyed being centre stage.
Despite Peter's apparent control, his mother Edith remained firmly in charge behind the scenes.
After we'd sort of spoken to Peter and told him that we'd sort of look into his complaint, then we'd have to go and report back to his mother. She seemed to still regard him as her little boy, despite the fact that he was a grown man running a business and providing for his mother.
I think she tried to keep him more of a child. I don't think she actually wanted him to grow up.
Away from the family business, Peter Moore would indulge his lifelong passion for film by renovating and opening the first of 3 local cinemas in 1990. Whilst carrying out some works for his new venture, Brian Dolman was quickly befriended by Moore.
I went up in the projector room with him a few times, really, and he used to tell me all about how this worked, how the films were made, and how the projectors worked, and what lighting you needed and what positions you had to be in. He was very, very intense.
One of Moore's most popular screenings was the Saturday Cinema Club, a chance for parents to drop off their kids whilst they did their weekend shopping.
People would bring their children to the cinema, and Peter would look after them till they came back. He thought the world of all the children, and he was keen to please them and make them happy to come to the cinema. He was a real gentleman.
But there was a darker side to the cinema owner.
I can remember now he started selling dubious videos, sleazy. You certainly wouldn't have walked out of them under your arm.
A man who was well known. Nobody could have guessed that he had such a secret, a dark side to his personality.
I was aware that he had a liking to wear leather clothes and had this nightlife that he didn't display in front of his mother. She was totally unaware of that side of things.
When he went out, he was always dressed in black. It was his trademark, the long black leather coat, either a black or a dark grey shirt, black tie, black trousers.
And as he cruised the local streets, no one could have imagined the secret life that was unfolding in the increasingly twisted world of Peter Moore. During September 1995, the peaceful communities on the Isle of Anglesey were shattered by the brutal murder of local man Henry Roberts. Only the sighting of a van offered a potential clue to police as they hunted down the sadistic killer. Two months later, he struck again.
Keith Randalls was living in a caravan. He was acting as a road traffic safety officer while some construction work was carried on there.
We enjoyed each other's company. You know, he was a fantastic guy. Fantastic. We'd do raffles and anything to get some money in, because we used to send it off to hospitals and stuff like that. We used to take the old age pensioners on coach trips.
He was a very happy-go-lucky sort of person.
Very dry sense of humour, didn't he?
Yes, very dry sense of humour. Everybody who met him, everybody that knew him, seemed to like him.
With Christmas only a matter of weeks away, the 49-year-old was looking forward to visiting his daughter Lisa and her family.
We did have a really long conversation, and he was really happy and upbeat and looking forward to Christmas because he was coming to ours for Christmas dinner.
Family meant the world to him.
On the night in question, Keith had decided to treat himself after a long day at work.
He'd been into Llangefni. I think he'd had a pint in the pub and then bought some chips and had come home with a bag of chips back to the caravan.
The following morning, Keith's work colleagues turned up to the site as usual. But something was very wrong.
It was a busy road site, and the guys would come back next morning to start the day's work. And they found Keith's body outside of the caravan and contacted the police.
As detectives arrived on the scene, it would immediately become apparent that Keith Randalls had been the victim of murder. All the signs suggested he had suffered a prolonged, vicious attack.
The evidence showed that Keith had come out of the caravan, which is here, and that a scuffle had sort of taken place in this area here, and there were signs of a big struggle. And as they were fighting, Keith was getting stabbed repeatedly, and yet he was still managing to fight. And Keith was left to die here, where we're standing now.
He was pulled out of his caravan, killed without any mercy at all, in a completely motiveless attack.
You can imagine Keith thinking, you know, when somebody knocks on the door of the caravan, they're lost and they want some information. You know, not somebody gonna stab 9 times.
It completely tore us all apart. It was just something that you read in the newspapers, but it's not something you expect to happen to your family. And especially to sort of the person that my dad was. He was never offensive to anybody. I couldn't see how anybody would want to do him any harm.
The brutal stabbing bore all the hallmarks of the recent killing of Henry Roberts, less than 10 miles away.
The police had to look at the possibility that there was one person responsible for both murders. Both males, both live alone, both stabbed to death. Again, a van had been sighted. A van was sort of prevalent in both murders. Possibly the offender was using a van to travel across the island.
Just an hour's drive east, Kinmel Bay businessman Peter Moore was now living on his own, following the death of his beloved mother 19 months previously.
When Mrs. Moore passed away, Peter was heartbroken and he became quite introvert. He seemed to have a lot of pent-up anger, which I never could understand why. But I just felt that he's grieving for Mrs. Moore, grieving for his mum.
As Moore's hardware shop began to struggle, the lifelong film enthusiast had thrown himself into his true passion and opened a third local cinema in Holyhead, Anglesey.
I think Peter probably did want to build an empire. I think he probably had a vision that he would open lots of old cinemas and wake them up.
At that time, there was great interest in North Wales because this was the man who was resurrecting the cinema trade.
But in reality, the cinema business was struggling, and Peter Moore's private life was also spiralling out of control.
Once his mother died, he became entrenched in the S&M underworld because it wouldn't matter to him if he was discovered. He would not lose his mother's love because she was dead.
I don't want to imagine what went on. I heard noises and I've heard neighbours talk about, you know, things that they'd heard and suspected. But I cannot believe that this house turned into the House of Horrors.
People just saw him as probably, you know, a cinema buff, and they didn't know really what was inside of him, which was the real thing in terms of domination, sadism, and inflicting pain and horror and hurting people and frightening people. That's who he was.
And as Peter Moore's secret life of sadism continued, he would decide to treat himself as he reached his 49th year.
For his birthday, he bought himself a present, and the present was bought from a shop in Rill. And it was a commando dagger in a sheath.
Three months later, in December 1995, Anthony Davis became the third man to be murdered in North Wales within a matter of weeks. For Detective Constable Dave Morris, there was no doubt that the Anglesey killer had struck again.
There were some striking similarities to the previous two murders. There was a lone male, alone at night, and had been stabbed to death.
The latest killing had been perpetrated on Pensarn Beach, a known meeting point for gay men, and the scene of several violent assaults over the preceding years.
They did immediately appeal to the gay community for information through the press.
And within a matter of days, the police received an anonymous tip-off.
A gentleman described being approached by this man in black leather on Pensarn Beach and taken to an address in Kinmel Bay. At that address, he was badly assaulted. He'd been beaten, he'd been lashed, and he believed that he was going to die at the house and was lucky to get away with his life.
As an ex-Bobby on the beat, Detective Constable Morris was tasked with finding the house in Kinmel Bay.
The caller gave a description of the house, and he described, as he drive along the coast road to the traffic lights in Kinmel Bay. I loosely followed the description to the traffic lights. You turn right, and the house is on the right-hand side.
And the house that lay before him was a familiar sight. It belonged to local businessman Peter Moore.
I was able to make the connection. Peter Moore lives in that house. I know Peter Moore's a gay man. I know Peter Moore wears black leather because I've seen him. So I formed the opinion that he was a very good suspect.
Police then established that Moore was hiring a van that matched the description of those witnessed at the murder scenes. He was arrested. A knife was found in the van, and as police entered Moore's family home, they found evidence linking him to the murders of Anthony Davis, Keith Randalls, and Henry Roberts.
In the hallway downstairs, Tony Davis's coat was hanging up. It had been washed. Underneath the settee in his living area, they pulled the video recorder out and it corroborated with the serial number of the video recorder taken from Keith's caravan. There was a swastika flag hanging up in this bedroom. He'd actually taken that swastika flag from Henry's property.
Sexual murderers will very often take souvenirs or trophies from a crime scene, and they do it so that they can relive the crime by using the object that they took as a stimulus for their fantasies.
Inside the once grand Darlington house, investigators would find further evidence of Peter Moore's secret life.
In the house, there was all sorts of unusual things. There was whips, there was rubber truncheons, there was German helmets, German caps, and there was signs that S&M activity had been taking place in the house.
There'd be blood splatters on the walls and on the ceilings that marked the place where the blood had landed from, some sort of whip or something similar that would flick blood onto the ceiling.
It was so incongruous. You had these things like truncheons and uniforms there alongside fluffy toys on the bed.
And the unusual thing was that all the rooms had various signs of the S&M interest, but his mother's bedroom was kept intact. Even in death, he had the respect for his mother to keep it out of her bedroom.
But the sadist hadn't finished inflicting pain, and the friends and families of the victims would be next to be subjected to his cruelty. In December 1995, local cinema owner Peter Moore had confessed to the sadistic killings of 3 men in North Wales. Now in custody, Moore appeared to be revelling in the limelight.
He came out of Colwyn Bay cells into the prison van, and under normal circumstances, the offender's covered. But when he came out, he almost looked at the cameras and seemed to wallow in the fact that he was the man that's done it.
He would pose and he would smile. I mean, he was a very wicked man.
Looking on in pain and horror were the loved ones of the men whose lives he had viciously snuffed out.
He was televised a lot and shown in pictures a lot, and it could be quite distressing putting the telly on to see him waving his arms about.
I can remember seeing the picture of him on the telly with his cuffs on and kind of making a gesture of his hands in the air like that, you know, and I'll never forget that.
I think he just enjoyed being the center of attention. It was his 15 minutes of fame. The cameras were there and they were rolling, and he was going to put on a show.
Moore had confessed to the 3 murders, as well as over 50 assaults carried out in North Wales. But the exhibitionist didn't want the show to end.
He told us about a 4th murder, a murder that we weren't aware of. We didn't know about the murder of Edward Carthy at the time that we were investigating the other murders. It was very much a revelation to us, really.
Moore provided a detailed map, pinpointing exactly where he had cruelly knifed to death the vulnerable man in the tranquil beauty of a forest.
I think there was an element of him exercising his control, his domination over the police. There's no doubt that he got some form of pleasure from telling us about a murder that he committed that we didn't know about. Basically, literally one he got away with.
The reason that Moore, when he confessed, actually revealed another victim that the police did not know about is because now that he's caught, he wants to take charge. And he wants to be quite infamous and notorious.
Peter Moore faced trial for the 4 murders in November 1996. In court, his brazen behaviour would become an increasingly harrowing experience for the victims' families.
Every time he talked, and we were watching him, he'd have eye contact with us. And he kept looking at us with a smirk on his face.
I couldn't help it. I had to look at him, and he just looked straight back at me, and there was just nothing but what looked like humour behind his eyes. Yeah, he was just smirking.
He was absolutely enjoying every minute. It's as if he was on stage.
He thought himself a Hollywood star. Going to and from the court, you'd see a big smile and his hands in the air. Look at me, I'm Peter Moore. I'd bloody give him Peter Moore.
Despite his bravado, Peter Moore was found guilty of all 4 murders and sentenced to life in prison.
He didn't look remorseful once. There was never any hint at all of any upset or anything from him.
Ultimately, one question remained. Was Peter Moore's murderous campaign the final act of a sordid and violent script? Or was he born to kill?
The attacks may have been motivated because of his relationship with his father as a child growing up. He was attacking men in the late 50s, 60s, possibly, you could argue, his father's generation. The majority of the guys were all coming home from the pub. Peter made it quite clear to me that he didn't approve of drinking alcohol. His father drank alcohol. He didn't like his father drinking alcohol. He was attacking his father's way of life. He was attacking his father, basically.
Individuals like this, they don't wake up one morning and say, I think I'll go out and kill 5 women or 5 men and torture them to death. That sounds like a good thing. No, this begins 10, 15, 20 years earlier in the offender's mind, in his fantasies.
I do think Peter Moore was born to kill. I think the attacks throughout the 1970s and the 1980s were preparation for what was to come. I think it was always inside him. And once he'd committed that first murder, there was no going back then.
I think he was born to kill. He went out intentionally to harm people. For whatever reason, he was out to kill.
I think bad men come up with excuses. There is no excuse for what Peter Moore did.
I would say he had the predilection to become a killer simply because of the way he naturally took on the sadistic role. He certainly was vulnerable to becoming a killer.
Whilst Peter Moore remains safely locked away to this day, the pain of his murderous spree still touches the loved ones of those innocent men who lost their lives.
We have a lot of family get-togethers and we are close family, aren't we? So any special occasions, any events that happen, he's always missed. He should be there and he would have been there. So he's always missed.
And we've never been able to move on. I think we've got to the stage now we just live with it. I know my wife misses him. I see her of a night time sitting there and I can see the tears. That's how much she misses him. Anthony's memory, that's what we live for now.
Title: London 1995 Cold Case Resolved. Decades-old mystery ends with stunning courtroom confession. What if the man who carried one of London's darkest secrets sat in the same courtroom for years, unnoticed, watching everyone search for a killer who was standing only a few feet away? The rain never stopped that November night in 1995. Cold air drifted through the streets of East London. Red buses moved slowly beneath orange streetlights. People hurried home. Shop owners locked their doors. Nothing felt unusual. Then at 10:43 p.m., something happened that would haunt an entire city for decades. 27-year-old Rebecca Lawson disappeared, not vanished into another country, not kidnapped in broad daylight, not followed by witnesses. She simply walked around a corner and was never seen alive again. 1 minute she was there. The next, she became a ghost. At first, nobody panicked. Rebecca was independent, smart, organized, a journalist. She often worked late and occasionally changed her schedule without warning. Her friends assumed she was busy. Her colleagues assumed she was chasing a story. Her family assumed she would call tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. By sunrise, concern became fear. By the following evening, fear became alarm. By the third day, London had a missing person investigation. Police flooded the neighborhood. Officers knocked on doors. Posters covered bus stops. Witnesses came forward. Everyone had a story. Nobody had an answer. Then came the first strange detail. Rebecca's handbag was discovered beneath a railway bridge 2 miles away. Nothing was stolen. Her wallet remained untouched. Her identification card was inside. Even cash was still there. That made no sense. Robberies have motives. This didn't. Investigators immediately realized something terrifying. Whoever was involved didn't care about money. The entire atmosphere changed. Now it wasn't a missing person case. It was something much darker. Meanwhile, London's media exploded. Headlines appeared everywhere. Young journalist vanishes. Mystery deepens. Cold rain, empty streets, no answers. The city became obsessed. Tips poured in. Thousands of calls. Hundreds of names. Nothing useful. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Then another clue emerged. A witness remembered seeing Rebecca arguing with someone outside a cafe earlier that evening. The description was useless. Male, average height, dark coat, no face, no name, no voice, just a shadow. That shadow would haunt investigators for 30 years. Then came another bizarre discovery. Rebecca's notebook, found inside her apartment, open on her desk. 3 words were circled repeatedly. He's watching me. The room froze. Detectives stared at the page. Watching? Who? How long? Nobody knew. The words generated panic. Had Rebecca been stalked? Threatened? Following a dangerous story? The possibilities multiplied overnight. Investigators dove into her work. Political corruption, financial crimes, organized fraud. She had investigated dozens of people, dozens of enemies, thousands of pages. Every lead ended in silence. Months passed. Winter became spring. London kept moving. People forgot. Only her family refused. Every morning her mother waited by the telephone. Every birthday her father left a card unopened. Every Christmas, an empty chair remained at the table. Years passed. Still no answers. Then something even stranger happened. The case stopped making sense. No ransom. No body. No confession. No evidence. Nothing. As if Rebecca had evaporated into the rain. Eventually the headlines disappeared. The posters faded. Detectives retired. Boxes entered storage. The words nobody wanted to hear finally arrived. Cold case. But cold doesn't mean dead. It means waiting. Waiting for technology. Waiting for mistakes. Waiting for time itself to betray someone. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, a person continued living normally. Working. Smiling. Growing older. Invisible. That was the terrifying part. The killer wasn't hiding in darkness. The killer was living inside ordinary life. Years became decades. Children grew up. Buildings changed. Entire neighborhoods transformed. Yet one thing remained untouched. Rebecca's file. Inside a dusty evidence room. Thousands of pages. One unanswered question. What happened on that rainy night? Then, in 2024, something impossible happened. A young evidence technician named Daniel Mercer was reorganizing archive materials. Just another day. Just another box. Then he noticed something odd. A tiny envelope attached to Rebecca's file. Untested trace evidence. Never analyzed. Never reopened. Never explained. The envelope contained one item. A single button. Dark gray. Ordinary. Almost meaningless. Almost. Because sometimes entire mysteries hide inside the smallest objects. Daniel stared at it. Then he said something that would change everything. Why was this never tested? Nobody had an answer. 30 years earlier, technology wasn't advanced enough. Resources were limited. Priorities shifted. The evidence was forgotten. Until now, the button was immediately sent for modern forensic analysis. Nobody expected much. Buttons are everywhere. Millions exist. The odds were impossible. Days later, the laboratory called. The atmosphere inside headquarters changed instantly. The analyst spoke carefully. There is biological material. The room fell silent. Not enough to identify someone, but enough to continue testing. The investigation woke up. For the first time in decades, Rebecca Lawson's case was breathing again. Detectives reopened witness statements, old interviews, old photographs, old maps. Then they discovered something disturbing. One name kept appearing, not as a suspect, not as a witness, as background noise. Again, 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 at community events, at press conferences, at public meetings. Always there, always near, never noticed. A man nobody remembered. Because ordinary people are invisible, and invisible people can hide for decades. Detective Sarah Whitmore, assigned to reopen investigation, stared at dozens of photographs spread across a table. Then she whispered, "Why is he everywhere?" Nobody answered, because they were all asking the same question. Who was he, and why did nobody see him before? Outside, London carried on as usual. Rain touched the pavement. Trains moved beneath the city. People rushed to work. Nobody realized one of the oldest ghosts in the capital was beginning to wake up, because somewhere, inside an ordinary house, someone had spent 30 years believing time had erased everything. Someone had built an entire life around one dangerous assumption, that nobody would ever look again. But time was changing sides. And once time changes sides, it never stops moving. There is something deeply unsettling about discovering that a stranger has been standing in the background of your life for years without anyone noticing. Because once you see them, you start asking a terrifying question. How many times were they there before? And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared into a rainy November night, investigators were beginning to realize that her killer may never have been hiding at all. Inside Scotland Yard, Detective Sarah Whitmore pinned 23 photographs onto a giant board. Community fundraisers, memorial walks, press conferences, anniversary gatherings, different years, different weather, different crowds. The same man, always there, never in the center, never attracting attention, never speaking, just present. That terrified everyone, because ordinary criminals run, ordinary suspects disappear. This man stayed. For decades, the room remained silent. Then Sarah quietly said something nobody could ignore. He wanted to watch. Nobody answered, because they all felt it. Watching was a pattern. Watching Rebecca. Watching investigators. Watching her family. Watching London mourn. Then another discovery arrived. The photograph stretched all the way to 2019. 24 years. 24 years of appearances. Then suddenly, nothing. He vanished. That immediately alarmed investigators, because behavioral changes always mean something. Why stop after 24 years? What happened? Meanwhile, forensic laboratories continued analyzing the small gray button. Scientists identified the manufacturer, rare, discontinued in 1997, used by only 3 London clothing suppliers. The list was manageable, thousands of customers. Still enormous, but manageable. Then another breakthrough surfaced. Microscopic fibers attached to the button. Dark wool, expensive quality, imported fabric. Investigators rebuilt the profile. Male, likely professional, financially stable, organized, patient. That last word disturbed everyone. Patient, because patience is dangerous. Patience allows secrets to survive. Meanwhile, London carried on normally. Tourists filled the streets. Double-decker buses rolled through traffic. Big Ben echoed across the city. Nobody realized one of London's oldest ghosts was beginning to breathe again. Back at headquarters, Sarah reopened Rebecca's notebooks. Dozens of pages. Interviews. Research. Appointments. Dead ends. Then she found something odd. A name wasn't written. An initial was. Just one letter. M. Over and over again. Beside it, one sentence. He always arrives before everyone else. The room froze. Who was M? Nobody knew. Then another page. Knows too much. Another. Doesn't belong there. Then one final note. Why is he always watching? Sarah leaned back. A cold sensation spread through the room because Rebecca noticed him long before she disappeared. Meanwhile, analysts reconstructed her final week alive. Monday, work. Tuesday, interview. Wednesday, office. Thursday, late meeting. Friday, gone. Then another anomaly emerged. 4 consecutive days before she disappeared. Someone called her office from public phone booths. No message, no voice, no explanation, just silence. That disturbed investigators, because silence can be a weapon. Then something even stranger appeared. The phone booths were located near places Rebecca visited. The bookstore, the train station, the cafe, her apartment. The room became silent. Someone was tracking her. Someone was close, very close. Meanwhile, another retired detective entered headquarters. Arthur Hughes, 74 years old, one of the original investigators. He stared at Rebecca's photograph for a long moment. Then he said something chilling. "We miss someone." Nobody moved. He continued, "I felt it for 30 years. Sarah looked at him. "Who?" Arthur shook his head. "I don't know." Then he walked toward the photo board. His eyes widened. He pointed. The same man. The background figure. Arthur froze. His face turned pale. "That's him." The room exploded with questions. "You know him?" Arthur shook his head slowly. "No." Everyone stared. Then he said something terrifying. "I remember his eyes." The room went silent. 30 years. And he remembered the eyes. Because the man had been there during one press conference in 1996. Standing too close. Listening too carefully. Watching everyone. Then leaving. At the time, nobody noticed. Now, everything felt different. Meanwhile, forensic specialists enhanced the photographs. Facial recognition databases were activated. Nothing. No criminal records. No matches. No arrests. No history. Nothing. That was unsettling. Because people leave footprints. Everybody leaves footprints. Unless they've spent years learning how not to. Back at headquarters, Sarah studied Rebecca's final train ticket. Then she noticed something overlooked since 1995. Rebecca never used that station. Ever. The route made no sense. Why was she there? Investigators checked again. Then discovered an appointment. Deleted. Recovered through archive records. One line. 7:15 p.m. Meet M. The room froze. Nobody breathed. Meet M. That was it. That was the final thread. Someone she knew. Someone she feared. Someone she intended to meet. Then she disappeared. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, inside an ordinary house, a man opened a cupboard, removed an old newspaper, looked at Rebecca's photograph, then folded it again. His hands trembled, just slightly, but enough, because secrets age, and aging secrets become fragile. Back at headquarters, Sarah stood in front of the evidence board. 30 years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of waiting. Then she said something nobody would forget. Cold cases don't disappear. Everyone looked toward her. She continued. They wait for people to become careless. Nobody answered, because someone, somewhere, was becoming careless. The killer had survived 30 years. But survival creates confidence. Confidence creates routine. Routine creates mistakes. And mistakes destroy invisibility. Outside, rain began falling over London once again, almost identical to the night Rebecca vanished. The city moved as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, because after 30 years, history was beginning to move. And once history begins moving, it never walks backward again. There is a dangerous moment in every cold case when investigators stop asking what happened and start asking who was patient enough to wait 30 years, because patience is not an accident. Patience is a strategy. And in London, 3 decades after Rebecca Lawson disappeared into a rain-soaked night, detectives were beginning to understand that they were not dealing with spontaneous crime. They were dealing with someone who had built an entire life around silence. Inside Scotland Yard, Detective Sarah Whitmore stood in front of the evidence board. 23 photographs, one background figure, one mysterious initial, one impossible timeline. The room felt heavier than before, because for the first time since 1995, investigators were moving in one direction, forward. Meanwhile, analysts continued examining Rebecca's recovered notes. Then another sentence appeared, written hastily, underlined twice. He knows where I go before I arrive. The room instantly froze. Nobody spoke, because that wasn't suspicion anymore. That was fear, real fear. Then another line. I've seen him before. No name, no explanation, just those words. Sarah stared at the notebook, then whispered. Rebecca was trying to warn us. Nobody answered, because everyone knew she was right. Meanwhile, another team reconstructed Rebecca's final day alive. 8:12 a.m. Coffee shop, 10:30 a.m. Editorial meeting, 1:45 p.m. Lunch with colleagues, 4:20 p.m. Phone call, 7:15 p.m. Meet M, 10:43 p.m. Gone. Everything looked ordinary, until analysts focused on the 4:20 p.m. phone call. No number, no identity, just 4 minutes and 36 seconds. Then something strange surfaced. Immediately after the call, Rebecca left her office and purchased a small disposable camera. The room went silent. Why? She never used disposable cameras. Never. That changed everything. Because cameras preserve evidence. And frightened people create evidence. Meanwhile, London carried on as normal. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Taxis crossed wet streets. Train stations filled with commuters. Nobody realized one of the city's oldest mysteries was beginning to collapse. Back at headquarters, the camera became the priority. Unfortunately, investigators never recovered it. Not in her apartment. Not in her office. Not among her belongings. Gone. That terrified everyone, because someone had taken it. Then another clue emerged. A co-worker from 1995 resurfaced. Margaret Ellis. 71 years old, retired. She hadn't spoken about Rebecca in decades. Then she saw a television report about the reopened case, and suddenly she remembered something. Rebecca had become paranoid during her final week. Not irrational, specific. She repeatedly looked over her shoulder, repeatedly checked windows, repeatedly changed routes home. Then Margaret said something that sent chills through the room. She said someone kept appearing everywhere. Sarah leaned forward. Did she describe him? Margaret nodded. Quiet. The room remained silent. Very quiet. Then she continued. He always looked like he belonged. Nobody moved, because that sentence explained everything. Belonging is camouflage. Predators survive by blending in. Meanwhile, forensic analysts returned with another breakthrough. The biological material found on the gray button had been partially enhanced. The profile wasn't complete, but it was enough to narrow possibilities. Male, European ancestry, older than investigators initially expected. The room grew quiet. Then Sarah noticed something else. If he was older, that meant he wasn't a young predator. He was already an adult in 1995, an experienced adult. That changed the psychological profile entirely. Meanwhile, another strange discovery surfaced. The mystery man stopped appearing in photographs after 2019, but investigators found something else. Online memorial pages. Every year, without fail, a user left flowers virtually. No name, no message, just flowers. For 24 years. The account name was simple. M95. The room instantly froze. Nobody breathed. M. Then Detective Sarah whispered. He never left. Nobody answered, because everyone felt the same thing. The killer had been attending Rebecca's memory for decades. Invisible, untouchable, watching. Again. Then another bombshell arrived. Cyber analysts traced the account. VPN, proxy servers. layers of protection, very sophisticated, too sophisticated. That was alarming, because ordinary people don't spend decades protecting anonymous memorial accounts. Back at headquarters, Arthur Hughes sat quietly. Then he suddenly stood up. His eyes widened. He remembered something. The first anniversary vigil. The background man wasn't alone. He was carrying an umbrella. Black umbrella. Silver handle. Arthur froze. The memory was clear. Then he said something nobody expected. "I've seen that umbrella recently." The room exploded into action. Recent CCTV footage. Memorial events. Public gatherings. Then, a match. Same umbrella. Same silver handle. Same man. Older now. Gray hair. Different glasses. But the same face. The room fell silent. 30 years. And he was still coming back. That wasn't confidence anymore. That was obsession. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, inside an ordinary home, a man sat in an armchair, watching evening news. Rebecca Lawson's face appeared on television once again. He stared, expressionless, then quietly lowered his head for several seconds, then switched channels. Back at headquarters, Sarah looked at the evidence board. Then she said something chilling. "This isn't about getting away with murder anymore." Everyone looked toward her. She continued, "This is about possession." Nobody answered, because possession lasts. Obsession lasts. Normal grief fades. This didn't. 30 years later, he was still there, still watching, still remembering, still protecting a secret. Outside, London's rain intensified. The city moved beneath dark skies. Nobody realized that somewhere among millions of people, one man who believed time had erased him was beginning to run out of places to hide, because time was no longer his ally. Time had changed sides. And once time turns against you, it never stops walking. There's a terrifying difference between a suspect and an obsession, because suspects eventually disappear from investigation, but obsessions never leave. They linger. They wait. They grow stronger with time. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson vanished into a rainy November night, investigators were beginning to realize they were not hunting a killer who had escaped. They were hunting a man who had never truly left. Inside Scotland Yard, Detective Sarah Whitmore stared at the board. 23 photographs. One anonymous online account. One mysterious initial. One silver-handled umbrella. One ordinary face. The room had become unnervingly quiet, because the investigation was changing. No longer a search for clues. Now it was a search for a life. Who was he? How did he know Rebecca? And why did he spend 30 years orbiting around her memory? Meanwhile, analysts expanded facial recognition searches. Nothing. No criminal history. No arrests. No prison records. Nothing. Again, that disturbed everyone. Because truly invisible people are rare. Nobody lives 30 years without leaving footprints. Unless they are extremely careful. Then another breakthrough arrived. Investigators enhanced one of the old photographs from 1997. Rebecca's second memorial vigil. Rainy evening. Crowded sidewalk. Candles everywhere. The mystery man stood in the background. This time, something else appeared. A badge attached to his jacket. Tiny. Blurry. Almost impossible to see. Forensic enhancement began immediately. Hours passed. Then the image sharpened. The room froze. A Transport Authority badge. London Public Transportation. The entire atmosphere changed. Because suddenly they had a direction. Thousands of employees. Still enormous, but far smaller than millions of London residents. Meanwhile, London moved normally. The underground carried millions of passengers. Tourists filled historic streets. Big Ben echoed over the Thames. Nobody realized history was beginning to accelerate. Back at headquarters, another discovery emerged. Rebecca's old office landline logs. One number appeared repeatedly. Always brief. Always silent. Always disconnected. Then investigators traced it. A train station payphone. Then another call. Another station. Then another. The locations form a pattern. Every station sat along one transport route, the exact route serviced by one transport district, the same district connected to the badge. The room instantly became silent. Then Sarah said, "He worked nearby." Nobody argued, because coincidence was disappearing. Meanwhile, retired Detective Arthur Hughes reopened his own notebooks from 1995. Dust covered the pages. 30 years old. Then he found something horrifying. A note he had written and forgotten. Man seen observing press conference. No suspicious behavior. Arthur stared at the page, then closed his eyes. 30 years. 30 years of regret. Then he whispered, "We saw him." Nobody answered, because everyone felt the weight of those words. They saw him, and he walked away. Meanwhile, analysts rebuilt Rebecca's social life. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, family. Then another anomaly surfaced. For 6 months before her disappearance, Rebecca changed cafes, changed bookstores, changed routes home. She was adapting. That wasn't random. People adapt when they feel unsafe. Then another note surfaced, hidden between newspaper clippings. Only one sentence. "Everywhere I go, he arrives first." The room froze, because that wasn't stalking anymore. That was systematic surveillance. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, inside an ordinary home, a man stood beside a bookshelf. He removed a worn folder, opened it. Inside were newspaper articles, memorial invitations, old photographs, 30 years of history. He stared at Rebecca's picture, then carefully returned everything. The investigators didn't know this yet, but they soon would. Back at Scotland Yard, Transport Authority records finally arrived. Thousands of names, thousands of employees. Sarah built a filter. Mayo, present in East London in 1995. Long-term employment. Still alive. The list shrank dramatically. Then another detail surfaced. One employee repeatedly volunteered at public events, community safety programs, memorial gatherings, charity functions. The room instantly froze, because that's exactly where the mystery man kept appearing. Then Sarah said something unsettling. He inserted himself into the city. Nobody answered, because it was true. Invisible people survive by becoming useful. Then another witness resurfaced, a retired cafe owner, 78 years old. She immediately recognized Rebecca's photograph. Then she remembered someone else, the quiet man. He sat by the window. The room leaned forward. How often? She answered immediately. Every Thursday. The room froze. Rebecca visited that cafe every Thursday. Then she said something chilling. He never ordered much. Everyone stared. He just watched. Silence. Again, watching. Always watching. Then she added one more detail. He carried a black notebook. Back at headquarters, Sarah's eyes widened. Rebecca carried notebooks too. That similarity disturbed her. Obsession often imitates. Then another bombshell arrived. One of the employee names on the Transport Authority list matched the age profile, matched the area, matched the timeline, matched everything. But detectives stayed calm, because suspicion isn't proof. Not yet. Meanwhile, the man finished work, left the station, walked home, perfectly ordinary, perfectly invisible. No one around him suspected anything. No one ever had. That was the terrifying part. For 30 years, he had blended into London's heartbeat. Every train, every station, every ordinary day. Then Sarah stood before the evidence board. She stared at Rebecca's smiling photograph, then at the face hidden in the background for decades. Then she whispered, "You got too comfortable." Nobody answered, because that's exactly what happened. 30 years creates confidence. Confidence creates routine. Routine creates mistakes. And mistakes destroy secrets. Outside, rain began falling once again over London. The same cold rain, the same dark streets, the same city. But this time, history was awake. And somewhere among millions of people, a man who believed he had become invisible was beginning to lose his shadow. because time was no longer protecting him. Time was preparing to expose him. There's a terrifying moment in every cold case when investigators stop wondering whether they are close and start worrying about how long the suspect has been watching them back. Because some killers don't run from investigations. They study them. They adapt to them. They grow old beside them. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared forever, detectives were beginning to realize they were dealing with someone who had spent decades perfecting invisibility. Inside Scotland Yard, Detective Sarah Whitmore stood in front of a newly updated board, the Transport Authority employee list, the age profile, the photographs, the memorial appearances, the umbrella, the phone booth locations. Everything was beginning to overlap, and somewhere in that overlap, one ordinary man was hiding. Meanwhile, analysts narrowed thousands of names down to 17. 17 possible candidates. Still too many. Still frustrating. But far closer than investigators had ever been before. Then another discovery surfaced. Employee attendance records. One name immediately stood out. The man rarely missed work. Never late. Never caused problems. Never attracted attention. Perfect. Too perfect. Because perfection itself can become suspicious. Nobody lives 30 years without disruption. Nobody. Then Detective Sarah quietly said, he built a life designed not to be remembered. Nobody answered, because that sentence explained everything. Invisible, reliable, ordinary. That was his armor. Meanwhile, London continued moving. Commuters rushed through train stations. Rain tapped against glass windows. Street musicians played outside underground entrances. Nobody realized one of the city's oldest ghosts was beginning to lose its grip. Back at headquarters, investigators reopened every witness statement once again. Then another pattern emerged. People described the same feeling. Not the same person. The same feeling. He was always there. I can't explain it. He seemed familiar. I thought he worked nearby. That terrified everyone, because familiarity is powerful. Humans trust what they recognize, and predators understand that. Then another retired co-worker came forward, David Miller, 72 years old, former transport employee. He looked at one of the candidate photographs. Then his eyes widened. I know him. The room instantly froze. Sarah leaned forward. What do you remember? David thought for a moment, then answered. He loved routines. Nobody moved. David continued. Every single day. Same train. Same coffee. Same bench. Same lunch. Same route home. The room grew quiet, because routine had become the signature. Then David said something chilling. He watched people. Sarah stared at him. What do you mean? David shrugged. He'd sit there for hours. The room leaned forward. Doing what? David answered immediately. Nothing. Silence filled the room, because doing nothing is sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do. Watching. Again, always watching. Meanwhile, investigators obtained archived payroll records. Then another anomaly surfaced. In late 1995, immediately after Rebecca disappeared, he requested a transfer. No explanation. No promotion. No salary increase. Just a transfer. The room froze. Because people often leave places connected to trauma or secrets. Then another date surfaced, November 18th, 1995, 4 days after Rebecca disappeared. The transfer was approved. Sarah whispered he was creating distance. Nobody answered, because everyone felt it. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, inside an ordinary house, a man opened a kitchen drawer, removed a folded newspaper. Rebecca's face stared back at him, 30 years old, yellowed, fragile. He touched the edge of the paper, then carefully folded it again. His hand shook slightly. More than before. The pressure was building. Back at Scotland Yard, cyber analysts discovered something new. The anonymous memorial account, M95, had once made a mistake. Just one. Years ago. For 8 seconds. The VPN disconnected. 8 seconds. That was all. but 8 seconds was enough. The account briefly connected to a home internet provider. The room exploded into activity. Addresses appeared. The list narrowed, then narrowed again. Then one address remained. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because for the first time in 30 years, history had a door number. Meanwhile, surveillance authorization was approved. No confrontation. No interviews. No arrests. Not yet. Just observation. At 6:07 a.m., he left his house. Coffee, train station, work, lunch, home, everything ordinary, painfully ordinary. Then investigators noticed something. Every Tuesday, he visited a small park, stayed exactly 19 minutes, then left. No exercise, no meetings, no phone calls, just sitting. Then Sarah discovered something horrifying. Rebecca used to walk through that park every Tuesday in 1995. The room froze. 30 years later, he was still returning there. That wasn't memory. That was obsession. Then Detective Sarah whispered. He never let her go. Nobody answered, because everyone understood. This wasn't about escaping punishment anymore. This was about possession. Somewhere inside his mind, Rebecca had never disappeared. She had never left. She had simply become part of his routine. And routines are difficult to break. Meanwhile, outside headquarters, London's rain intensified. The city glowed beneath thousands of lights. People hurried home. Families gathered for dinner. Nobody realized history was accelerating beneath their feet. Back inside Scotland Yard, Sarah stood before Rebecca's photograph. 30 years. 30 years of silence. 30 years of waiting. Then she quietly said something nobody would ever forget. Cold cases aren't unsolved. Everyone looked at her. She continued. They're unfinished. Nobody spoke, because she was right. For 30 years, this story had remained unfinished. But now, the ending was beginning to write itself. And somewhere in London, inside an ordinary house, a man who had successfully hidden for 3 decades was beginning to run out of time, because time had finally stopped protecting him. And once time changes sides, it never changes back. There is something far more terrifying in discovering who the killer is. It is realizing that they have been living an ordinary life for 30 years while everyone else carried the weight of their secret. Because evil rarely announces itself. It adapts. It ages. It becomes invisible. And in London, investigators were now closer than ever to exposing a man who had quietly woven himself into the fabric of an entire city. Inside Scotland Yard, surveillance operations had entered their 6th day. No contact, no interviews, no mistakes. The suspect remained unaware. At least, that was the assumption. Every movement was documented. 6:07 a.m. Leaves home. 6:18 a.m. Buys coffee. 6:24 a.m. Boards train. 7:01 a.m. Arrives at work. 12:15 p.m. Lunch alone. 5:42 p.m. Returns home. Ordinary. Every single day. That was the unsettling part. His life looked almost manufactured. Too precise. Too stable. Too controlled. Detective Sarah Whitmore stared at the surveillance reports. Then she quietly said, "Nobody is this predictable naturally." Nobody answered, because everyone understood. Predictability was his shield. Routine was his camouflage. Meanwhile, another forensic breakthrough arrived. Investigators had reopened Rebecca Lawson's apartment evidence. 30 years untouched. Dust-covered boxes. Old photographs. Receipts. Cassette tapes. Then they found something previously ignored. An answering machine tape. The room instantly froze. Nobody remembered it. Technology in 1995 wasn't advanced enough to isolate certain sounds. Now it was. The tape was restored. Static filled the room. Then Rebecca's voice. "Hi, leave a message." Silence. 3 seconds. Heavy breathing. Then a click. Another call. Same thing. Then another. Again. Nothing. Just breathing. The room became silent. Then analysts enhanced the background noise. Train brakes, announcements, station echoes. Everyone looked at each other. The calls were coming from transport stations. Again, always nearby. Then another sound emerged. A watch alarm. 3 beeps. Sarah immediately paused the recording, because investigators had seen something similar before. During surveillance, the suspect wore an old digital watch. Every day, at exactly 6:30 p.m., 3 identical beeps. The room froze. Nobody moved. 30 years. One tiny sound. One tiny habit. That was all it took. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, the suspect sat inside his house, watching television, completely calm, or at least pretending to be. His eyes looked tired, older, less focused. Secrets become heavier with age, especially when they begin to crack. Back at headquarters, investigators examined his financial history. Nothing suspicious. No debts. No unusual purchases. No criminal activity. Then they found something odd. Every November, without fail, he withdrew exactly 50 pounds in cash. Every year, the same amount, the same date, November 14th. The date Rebecca disappeared. The room instantly fell silent. Nobody needed to say anything. The pattern spoke for itself. Then another discovery emerged. A florist located near the memorial site. 30 years of records. One anonymous customer. One bouquet. Every year. No card. No message. White lilies. The exact flowers Rebecca's family always brought. Sarah leaned back. This is no longer coincidence. Nobody disagreed, because coincidence had vanished long ago. Meanwhile, retired Detective Arthur Hughes sat quietly, then suddenly spoke. I know why he came back every year. The room looked at him. Arthur answered softly. He wanted ownership. Nobody interrupted. Arthur continued. Some people don't want victims. The room stayed silent. They want permanence. That word hit everyone hard. Permanence. Rebecca had become permanent inside his world. An obsession frozen in time. Meanwhile, another search warrant was quietly approved. Investigators collected discarded items. Coffee cups, tissues, packaging, anything that could produce DNA. Then the laboratory called. A partial match. The room froze. Not complete, but strong enough. Strong enough to justify moving forward. Strong enough to transform suspicion into reality. Strong enough to make everyone realize something terrifying. They were no longer looking for a possibility. They were looking at him. Meanwhile, London's media remained unaware. No leaks. No headlines. No rumors. The city continued moving peacefully. People hurried to work. Children walked home from school. Tourists crowded the streets. Nobody knew history was approaching its final act. Back inside surveillance headquarters, another anomaly appeared. The suspect broke his routine, for the first time in years. At 8:12 p.m., he left his house unexpectedly. No destination logged. No explanation. Investigators followed carefully. No mistakes. No sudden moves. Then he arrived somewhere unexpected. Rebecca Lawson's memorial plaque. He stood there, motionless. Rain fell around him. Cars passed. Nobody noticed. For 11 minutes, he simply stared. Then he whispered something. The microphone couldn't capture everything. Only 3 words. I'm sorry, Rebecca. The room exploded into silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Because apologies reveal relationships. Relationships reveal truths. Then Detective Sarah whispered. He knew her. Nobody answered. Because that truth had finally arrived. Not a random crime. Not an accidental encounter. He knew her. And she knew him. The mystery was changing shape. Outside, rain began falling across London once again. Almost identical to November 1995. The city glowed beneath wet streets and orange lights. Beautiful. Ordinary. Unaware. But somewhere inside one quiet home. A man who had successfully buried the truth for 30 years. was beginning to feel the ground move beneath him, because secrets don't collapse all at once. They crack slowly, one habit, one sound, one photograph, one mistake at a time. And once a secret begins to crack, it never becomes whole again. There is a moment in every cold case when investigators realize they are no longer chasing the past. They are chasing a living person whose entire world is beginning to collapse in real time. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared forever, that moment had finally arrived. Inside Scotland Yard, nobody spoke for several seconds. The audio replayed. Rain, traffic, footsteps, then 3 words. "I'm sorry, Rebecca." Detective Sarah Whitmore stared at the screen. The room remained silent, because apologies are dangerous. People do not apologize to strangers. People apologize to memories, to victims, to secrets. Then Sarah quietly said, "He's carrying guilt." Nobody answered, because guilt changes everything. A person can hide evidence. A person can hide motives. But guilt always leaks. Eventually. Meanwhile, somewhere across London, the suspect was sitting alone at his kitchen table. The television was on. He wasn't watching. His coffee sat untouched. For the first time in years, his routine was fractured. Tiny cracks, almost invisible, but investigators noticed. They always do. Back at headquarters, analysts expanded their timeline. The man was 67 years old. He had spent over 3 decades building a life around one dangerous assumption, that nobody would ever reopen Rebecca's file. That assumption was dying. Then another bombshell arrived. A forgotten archive from Rebecca's newspaper office. Employee visitor logs. 30 years old. Yellowed paper. Handwritten signatures. Thousands of names. Then one signature appeared. His. The room instantly froze. Nobody moved, because for the first time, he wasn't hiding in the background. He was officially connected to Rebecca. Date, October 3rd, 1995. Reason for visit. Transportation interview. The room became silent. Then Sarah whispered, "So that's how they met." Nobody answered, because the entire story was changing shape. He wasn't a random observer. He entered her world, then never left it. Meanwhile, investigators dug deeper. Rebecca had been writing a feature article about safety failures within London's transport system. Misinspections, hidden reports, unauthorized shortcuts. Nothing massive, nothing explosive, just ordinary corruption. But ordinary secrets can create dangerous enemies. Then another notebook entry surfaced. One sentence. He keeps asking personal questions. The room froze. Another sentence. He knows too much about my schedule. Then another. Something feels wrong. Nobody breathed, because Rebecca noticed him. She simply didn't understand how dangerous he was. Meanwhile, London carried on as normal. Street vendors sold coffee. People crossed bridges over the Thames. Tourists took photographs. Nobody realized one of the city's oldest mysteries was unraveling minute by minute. Back at headquarters, surveillance intensified. Then another anomaly surfaced. At exactly 9:14 p.m., the suspect opened a locked drawer. Investigators watched carefully. He removed a small notebook, black cover, worn edges. He stared at it, then put it back. That was unusual, because during 6 days of observation, he had never touched it before. Detective Sarah leaned closer. "He's worried." Nobody argued, because anxiety changes behavior, and behavior exposes truth. Then another extraordinary discovery arrived. Investigators searched old property records. In 1998, 3 years after Rebecca disappeared, he renovated his garage. Nothing suspicious, until they examined the permits. A hidden storage compartment had been added. The room instantly went quiet, because hidden compartments rarely exist without purpose. Then Sarah said, "We need a warrant." Nobody hesitated. Meanwhile, somewhere inside his home, the suspect sat motionless. Rain tapped against the window, the same kind of rain that had fallen in November 1995. His eyes remained fixed on nothing. Then he whispered something impossible for investigators to hear. One sentence. One sentence that would later change everything. Back at headquarters, a psychologist reviewed his profile. Then she said something unsettling. "He's tired." Sarah looked at her. "Tired?" The psychologist nodded. 30 years is exhausting. Nobody spoke. She continued. People think secrets become easier to carry. The room stayed silent. They don't. Secrets become heavier. That sentence lingered in everyone's mind, because perhaps that was true. Perhaps every anniversary had become harder, every memorial heavier, every newspaper article more painful. Meanwhile, investigators prepared to execute the garage search warrant. No arrests. Not yet. No confrontation. Not yet. They needed certainty, because after 30 years, there could be no mistakes. Then another tiny detail emerged. His digital calendar. Investigators had obtained partial metadata. Every November 14th, one recurring entry. No description. Just one letter. R. Every year. 30 years. Nobody spoke. Because even now, he couldn't let her go. Meanwhile, London's rain intensified. Cars splashed through puddles. The underground roared beneath the city. Big Ben echoed through the night. History was moving faster now. Much faster. Back inside Scotland Yard, Sarah stood in front of Rebecca's photograph. Then she said something nobody would forget. Some people disappear. Everyone looked toward her. She continued. But some people are kept. Nobody answered, because everyone finally understood. This wasn't about hatred. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about revenge. It was obsession, pure obsession. A person so consumed by another life that he built his own existence around it. Then the operation order arrived. Tomorrow morning, garage search, full evidence team. No delays, no mistakes. 30 years of waiting had finally reached its breaking point. Meanwhile, inside an ordinary London home, a man who had successfully hidden for 3 decades sat quietly in the dark. He had no idea that tomorrow, everything would begin to collapse. Because truth doesn't knock loudly. Truth arrives patiently. One clue, one photograph, one mistake at a time. And once truth finds your door, it never leaves. There's a terrifying truth about secrets that survive for decades. They do not disappear. They build homes inside the people who carry them. They reshape routines. They alter memories. They become a second life. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson vanished into a rainy November night, investigators were finally preparing to walk directly into the place where that second life had been hidden. Before sunrise, Scotland Yard was already awake. Nobody was talking loudly. Nobody was celebrating, because they all understood something important. This was not victory. This was responsibility. 30 years of waiting had led to this moment. One mistake could destroy everything. Meanwhile, inside his house, the suspect woke up at exactly 5:58 a.m., 2 minutes later than usual. Investigators noticed immediately. Tiny changes matter, especially after decades of identical behavior. He prepared coffee, opened the newspaper, stared at it, but he wasn't reading. He looked distracted. His hands lingered on the edges of the paper. His breathing was slightly heavier. The surveillance team noticed. Detective Sarah Whitmore noticed. Everyone noticed. Then Sarah quietly said, "He feels something." Nobody answered, because instinct is powerful. People who carry secrets for decades often sense danger before they see it. Meanwhile, outside his home, search teams prepared. No sirens, no flashing lights, no dramatic movements, just patience. At exactly 9:02 a.m., he left for work, his usual routine. Coffee, train station, platform, office. Nothing unusual, until investigators entered the house. Every room was documented, every drawer photographed, every cabinet examined. No assumptions, no shortcuts. 30 years demanded precision. Then they entered the garage. The hidden compartment sat behind a metal storage shelf. Small, invisible, Ordinary. The forensic team carefully removed the panel. The room instantly fell silent. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, perfectly organized, perfectly preserved. Nobody spoke. Then one investigator opened the first box. Newspaper clippings. Every article ever published about Rebecca Lawson. Another box. Memorial programs. Another. Photographs. Another. Maps. Another. Handwritten notes. The atmosphere became heavy, because this was no longer suspicion. This was obsession. 30 years of obsession. Then another discovery emerged. A black notebook. The same one investigators had seen during surveillance. Sarah opened it carefully. Page 1. November 1995. One sentence. She noticed me. Page 2. She was smarter than I expected. The room froze. Nobody moved. Then page after page revealed something horrifying. He documented everything. Every encounter. Every memorial. Every anniversary. Every news article. Every rumor. Every year. 30 years. One life dedicated to protecting one secret. Then investigators found another sentence, written in larger letters. I never wanted this to happen. Nobody breathed, because that sentence raised a terrifying question. What actually happened that night? Meanwhile, at work, the suspect remained unusually quiet. Co-workers noticed. He barely spoke, barely smiled. Then he left his desk 3 times in an hour. Another anomaly. The surveillance team immediately updated Sarah. He's nervous. Nobody argued, because after 30 years, his world was beginning to shake. Back at the garage, investigators opened another box. Inside was something impossible. Rebecca's disposable camera. The room froze. Nobody moved. 30 years. 30 years missing. And there it was, untouched, preserved, waiting. Sarah immediately ordered emergency processing. The film was developed carefully. The room stayed silent. Then the photographs appeared. Rebecca, a cafe, a street corner, a train station. Then one final image. The room instantly froze. A man standing across the street, watching her. The suspect, 30 years younger. The entire room fell silent. Nobody needed to say anything, because Rebecca knew. She had seen him. She had documented him. She was trying to protect herself. Then another photograph appeared, blurred, rain falling, Rebecca turning around, fear visible on her face. The final image, darkness, nothing else. The room became completely silent. Meanwhile, somewhere across London, the suspect suddenly stopped walking. He stood motionless for several seconds, then looked over his shoulder. Nobody was there, but something had changed. His instincts were screaming, because secrets know when they're dying. Back at headquarters, the evidence board was transformed. Photographs, DNA, phone calls, memorial records, visitor logs, journal entries, the camera. Everything pointed to one person. Then Detective Sarah whispered, "This is over." Nobody answered, because everyone knew. The mystery itself was ending. But another question remained. Would he confess? Meanwhile, rain began falling over London again. Heavy, cold, familiar. The same rain, the same city. 30 years later, history had finally returned to where it started. Back inside the garage, investigators opened one final envelope. Only one page sat inside. One sentence, written years ago. If anyone ever finds this, it means time finally won. The room froze. Nobody moved, because that was the truth. Time had won, not detectives, not technology. Time, because time erodes confidence. Time weakens secrets. Time punishes patience. Time betrays everyone. Meanwhile, inside an ordinary office building, a man who had survived for 3 decades was unknowingly living the final normal day of his life, because tomorrow there would be no more routines, no more anniversaries, no more hidden compartments, no more invisible existence, only truth, and truth was finally at his doorstep. There's a moment in every cold case when time stops being an ally and becomes an executioner, because time is patient. It does not rush. It does not forget. It simply waits until a secret grows old enough to collapse under its own weight. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared forever, that collapse had finally begun. Inside Scotland Yard, nobody celebrated. Nobody smiled. Nobody spoke loudly. Because sitting in front of them was no longer a mystery. It was a life. 30 years of routines. 30 years of obsession. 30 years of silence. All connected to one man. Detective Sarah Whitmore stood in front of Rebecca's recovered disposable photographs. One image remained on the screen. The suspect, standing in the rain, watching. The room felt heavier than ever, because that photograph changed everything. It proved Rebecca knew she was being followed. It proved she was afraid. And most importantly, it proved she was trying to leave evidence behind. Meanwhile, forensic analysts continued processing items from the hidden garage compartment. Dozens of fingerprints. Hundreds of documents. Then another discovery surfaced. A folded city map. East London. Covered in markings. Red circles. Blue lines. Dates. Times. Investigators instantly froze. Because these weren't random notes. They were Rebecca's movements. Her apartment. Her office. Her favorite cafe. Her train station. Her bookstore. Her weekly routines. Everything. For months. Possibly longer. Sarah whispered. He studied her. Nobody answered. Because that word felt too small. Study. This was far beyond that. This was construction. He had built an entire world around another person's life. Meanwhile, somewhere in London, the suspect sat quietly inside his office. Co-workers chatted around him. Phones rang. Printers hummed. Everything looked ordinary. But something was different. His hands were shaking. Tiny movements. Almost invisible. But there, the surveillance team noticed immediately. Then another anomaly surfaced. He checked his watch. Again. Then again. Then again. 30 years of control were beginning to fracture. Back at headquarters, investigators found another notebook entry, dated November 13th, 1995, one day before Rebecca disappeared. Only one sentence. She said she was going to report me. The room instantly froze. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Because suddenly, the motive appeared. Not money. Not robbery. Not revenge. Fear. Fear of exposure. Rebecca was a journalist. She investigated people. She documented patterns. She asked questions. And somewhere along the way, she discovered something dangerous. Then another page. She doesn't understand. Another. She won't stop. Then another. I have no choice. The room became silent, because those 4 words have appeared in countless investigations throughout history. I have no choice. The lie people tell themselves before doing something irreversible. Meanwhile, rain returned to London. Heavy, cold, persistent. The exact kind of rain that had fallen 30 years earlier. History was repeating itself. Back at Scotland Yard, analysts reconstructed the final timeline. 7:15 p.m. Rebecca meets him. 8:06 p.m. Witness sees them talking. 9:11 p.m. Rebecca changes direction unexpectedly. 9:52 p.m. The final phone signal. 10:43 p.m. She disappears. Everything aligned. Then another bombshell arrived. One final piece of DNA had been enhanced from Rebecca's recovered camera. The room held its breath. A complete match. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because after 30 years, science had done what time could not. The name was officially attached. The suspect. No more theories. No more possibilities. No more uncertainty. Only truth. Meanwhile, the suspect stood from his desk. He walked outside. Rain hit his jacket. He stood beneath a building awning, then looked upward for several seconds. Motionless, as if listening, as if waiting. Then he whispered something. The microphone captured every word. "It's over." The surveillance room instantly froze. Nobody spoke, because he knew. Somehow, he knew. Back at headquarters, operational plans were finalized. No mistakes. No delays. Tomorrow morning, everything would end. Then retired Detective Arthur Hughes walked into the room, 30 years of regret visible on his face. He stared at Rebecca's photograph, then quietly said, "I'm sorry we took so long." Nobody answered, because everyone felt the same guilt. Cold cases steal time. Time from families. Time from victims. Time from entire communities. And no amount of justice can return it. Meanwhile, inside his house later that evening, the suspect opened the hidden compartment one final time. Only empty spaces remained. The boxes were gone. The notebooks were gone. The camera was gone. Everything was gone. He stared for a long moment, then closed the panel. His hands trembled harder than ever before, because for 30 years, that compartment held his second life. Now, it was empty, and empty spaces can be terrifying. Then he sat in complete darkness. No television, no radio, no phone, nothing, just silence. The same silence he had hidden behind for 3 decades. Outside, London glowed beneath endless rain. People hurried home. Restaurants filled with laughter. Cars moved through wet streets. Nobody realized history was entering its final hours. Back at Scotland Yard, Sarah stood before the evidence wall one last time. Rebecca's photograph. The suspect's photograph. 30 years between them. Then she whispered something nobody would ever forget. The truth didn't survive. Everyone looked at her. She continued. The truth endured. Nobody answered, because enduring is different. Enduring means surviving pressure, surviving time, surviving neglect, and after 30 years, the truth was still standing. Meanwhile, inside an ordinary London house, a man who had spent half his life outrunning history was about to discover something terrifying. History never stops running. It simply waits until you're too tired to run anymore. There's a silence that exists only at the end of the 30-year hunt, not the silence of mystery, not the silence of failure, but the silence that arrives when everyone in the room realizes they are no longer chasing a ghost. They are about to confront a human being. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared into a rain-soaked November night, that moment had finally arrived. Before sunrise, Scotland Yard was already alive. Computers glowed. Evidence folders covered every desk. Maps filled the walls. Nobody rushed. Nobody spoke loudly. Because after 30 years, every movement had to be perfect. Meanwhile, London was waking up. Buses rolled through narrow streets. Coffee shops opened. The underground roared beneath the city. Everything looked ordinary. Nobody realized one of London's oldest secrets was hours away from collapsing forever. Inside surveillance headquarters, Detective Sarah Whitmore stared at the operation board. Every detail was finalized. Every route assigned. Every officer positioned. No mistakes. No surprises. 30 years deserved certainty. Meanwhile, inside his house, the suspect woke up at exactly 5:56 a.m., 2 minutes earlier than normal. Investigators noticed immediately. Tiny changes matter, especially after decades of repetition. He walked into the kitchen, prepared coffee, opened the newspaper, then stopped. He didn't read it. He simply stared at it, motionless, for minutes, 38 seconds, longer than ever before. Sarah whispered. He didn't sleep. Nobody answered, because everyone already knew. The exhaustion was visible. 30 years of silence were becoming impossible to carry. Meanwhile, analysts continued reviewing the notebooks recovered from the hidden compartment. Then they discovered one final page, dated January 2024. Only one sentence. "I don't think this can stay buried forever." The room instantly froze. Nobody moved, because he knew. Somewhere deep inside. He already knew. Then another page. February 2024. Technology changes everything. Another. March 2024. Someone will eventually ask the right question. The room fell silent, because that was exactly what happened. One evidence technician, one forgotten button, one simple question. Why was this never tested? 30 years began collapsing from that single moment. Meanwhile, somewhere across London, the suspect drove to work. But something unusual happened. He missed his usual turn, then corrected himself. Investigators immediately noticed. His concentration was deteriorating. Then he checked his rear-view mirror. Again, then again, then again. Fear was becoming visible. Back at Scotland Yard, Sarah stood before Rebecca's photograph. The same smile, the same face, frozen in time. Then she quietly said, "You never stop fighting." Nobody answered, because she was right. Rebecca had left clues everywhere. The notebook, the disposable camera, the observations, the warnings. She had been trying to tell someone. The world simply wasn't ready to listen. Meanwhile, another discovery emerged from the hidden notebooks. One page contained a list, 29 dates, every anniversary, every memorial, every public appearance he attended. Then one sentence written beneath them. I need to see that she still remembered. The room froze, because obsession had transformed into dependence. He no longer visited to hide. He visited because he needed it, needed her memory, needed her presence, needed the connection. Then Sarah whispered. She became part of his identity. Nobody argued, because 30 years changes people. 30 years reshapes reality. Meanwhile, London carried on normally. Tourists crossed Tower Bridge. Street performers entertained crowds. Office workers hurried through train stations. Nobody realized history was walking toward its final chapter. Inside headquarters, the final briefing began. Every investigator listened carefully. No confrontation inside public areas. No risks. No unnecessary force. Just truth. Then retired Detective Arthur Hughes stood quietly, 30 years older, 30 years wiser, 30 years heavier. He looked around the room, then said something nobody would ever forget. Cold cases don't die. The room remained silent. They wait. Nobody interrupted. They wait for someone stubborn enough to come back. The room stayed silent, because he was right. Someone always has to come back. Meanwhile, inside his office building, the suspect sat at his desk. He wasn't working. He wasn't reading. He wasn't moving. His eyes remained fixed on one spot. Then he suddenly opened his desk drawer, removed a photograph, looked at it, then quickly put away. Surveillance captured everything. Detective Sarah leaned closer. He's preparing himself. Nobody answered, because everyone could feel it. His instincts were screaming. The invisible life he had carefully built was ending. Then something unexpected happened. At exactly 3:17 p.m., he left work early, the first time in months. Investigators followed carefully. No mistakes. No sudden moves. Then he drove somewhere familiar. Rebecca Lawson's memorial plaque. Again, rain fell softly around him. He stood there, motionless, then quietly said, "I never meant for any of this." The microphone captured every word. The room instantly froze. Nobody spoke, because intentions don't erase actions. Intentions don't erase victims. Intentions don't erase 30 years of suffering. Meanwhile, he remained there, 7 minutes. Then he left, slowly, as if saying goodbye. Back at Scotland Yard, the operation order was signed. Tomorrow morning, everything would end. 30 years, thousands of hours, countless dead ends, countless unanswered questions, all leading here. Then Sarah stood one final time before the evidence wall. Rebecca, the suspect, 30 years between them. Then she whispered, "History is finished waiting." Nobody answered, because everyone understood. History had waited long enough. Outside, rain intensified over London. The same cold rain, the same dark streets, the same city. But not the same story anymore, because somewhere tonight, inside an ordinary London home, a man who had successfully hidden for 3 decades, was living the final anonymous night of his life, because tomorrow there would be no more shadows, no more invisibility, no more borrowed time, only truth, and truth was already at his front door. There is a moment when every cold case finally stops being a mystery and becomes a memory. But memories are complicated. They do not celebrate. They do not cheer. They do not erase pain. They simply allow people to stop waiting. And in London, 30 years after Rebecca Lawson disappeared into a cold November night, an entire city was about to stop waiting. Before sunrise, the operation began. No sirens, no dramatic announcements. No television cameras, just quiet determination. Detectives gathered outside his house. 30 years. 30 years had led to this exact doorstep. Nobody smiled, because this was not victory. This was accountability. Meanwhile, inside the house, the suspect woke up at 5:54 a.m. For minutes earlier than usual. His routine was gone now. His hands shook while preparing coffee. He opened the newspaper, then closed it immediately. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't tired. He was afraid, because somewhere deep inside him, he already knew. 30 years of instincts were screaming. Then came the knock. 3 soft knocks. Nothing aggressive. Nothing chaotic. Just history arriving at his front door. He froze. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then he slowly walked toward the entrance, opened the door, and saw them. Detectives, warrants, 30 years of truth standing before him. Nobody spoke at first. Then Detective Sarah Whitmore identified herself. The suspect looked at her, then lowered his head. The room became silent. Then he said something nobody would ever forget. I wonder when this day would come. Inside headquarters, investigators listening remotely froze, because innocent people usually react differently. Confusion, anger, shock, questions, but not this. This sounded like surrender. He stepped aside. No resistance, no argument, no attempt to run, just exhaustion. 30 years of exhaustion. Meanwhile, investigators entered the house. Every room documented, every item cataloged, everything methodical, everything professional. Then they reached the kitchen. On the table sat one photograph. Rebecca Lawson, framed. The room instantly froze. Nobody moved. 30 years. And she was still there. Then another discovery emerged. Inside a drawer, a letter, sealed, never sent, 30 pages long, addressed to Rebecca. Sarah carefully opened it. The first line made the entire room silent. I've been talking to you for 30 years because I couldn't live with what happened. Nobody spoke. The letter continued, page after page. Regret, fear, obsession, loneliness. Then came the truth. November 14th, 1995. Rebecca confronted him. She had discovered he was following her. She threatened to expose him publicly. An argument began. Rain intensified. Panic took over. One terrible decision changed everything. Seconds, only seconds, and a life was gone forever. Then came another devastating sentence. I thought if I stayed close to your memory, I could somehow keep you alive. The room became silent, because obsession had replaced reality. He wasn't honoring her. He was imprisoning himself beside her memory. Meanwhile, outside, London continued waking up. Buses crossed wet streets. People hurried to work. The city looked ordinary. But history was changing forever. Back inside headquarters, retired Detective Arthur Hughes sat quietly. Tears filled his eyes. 30 years. 30 years of unanswered questions. Then he whispered, "We found you." Nobody answered, because those 3 words were not for investigators. They were for Rebecca. Meanwhile, the suspect sat calmly during questioning. No dramatic outbursts. No excuses. Just exhaustion. He answered every question, every date, every location, every memory, as if he had been waiting for permission to stop carrying the secret. Then he said something that would appear in headlines around the world. Time never let me forget. The room froze, because he was right. Time never forgets. Time waits. Time observes. Time grows heavier. Time wins. Weeks later, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, investigators, citizens, people who remember Rebecca, people who were not even born in 1995. Everyone waited. Then he stood, older, smaller, weaker, no longer invisible. Then came the confession, clear, direct, undeniable. 30 years of silence collapsed in minutes. Outside, headlines exploded. London 1995 cold case resolved. 3 decades of mystery finally end. Courtroom confession shocks Britain. The entire city paused. Rebecca Lawson's photograph appeared everywhere once again. But this time, the story was different. Not because pain had disappeared, but because uncertainty had. Her family arrived later that day. Older now, changed by time. 30 birthdays missed. 30 Christmases altered. 30 years stolen. Nothing could return that. Nothing ever would. But waiting was finally over. And sometimes, that is the closest thing justice can offer. As evening settled over London, Detective Sarah Whitmore walked past Rebecca's memorial plaque. Fresh white lilies rested beneath her name. Rain softly touched the stone. Cars passed by. People continued living. Life moved forward. It always does. Then Sarah quietly said something nobody else would hear. "You can rest now." The wind carried the words away. And somewhere inside the city, one of London's oldest ghosts finally disappeared. But one unsettling thought remained. How many other forgotten evidence boxes still exist? How many other names are waiting beneath decades of dust? How many other ordinary faces are hiding extraordinary secrets? Because somewhere tonight, someone may still believe they escaped. Someone may still believe 30 years is enough. Someone may still believe the world has forgotten. But history never forgets. Truth never dies. And time always comes back.